VCs often claim to their LPs that boards is where we're valuable. Do you think boards are valuable, Oana? Because you've seen them across spectrum, I guess, with Scale and then with SignalFire. Do you think they're valuable?
I think putting aside the governance issues, they're valuable in seeing some of the functional leaders present. That gives you as a board member a better lens into how the founder builds the team, but also gives these functional leaders a voice.
Totally agree. Who's the best board member that you've sat on a board with and why?
This is a hard one because I do sit on a bunch of boards with very amazing people.
Don't worry, none of them will listen. It's just you and me.
I will pick the most recent board meeting, and that was with Dan Scholnick, who invested in New Relic, Docker, Weights and Biases, and a bunch of other amazing companies. I like Dan because he's low ego, he's very action oriented, and he acts in service of the founders.
I love that, and thank you for giving one. Very few people actually give one, so I'm super grateful for that. In terms of your learning process on like what it takes to be a good board member, like what do you think are the biggest mistakes you see younger people and younger investors make on boards that you've observed?
As a younger investor, you tend to talk too much and not listen. So I think that's the biggest mistake.
I totally agree. I also think for founders, it's very tough. Like young founders, how do you know how to run a board meeting? It's not a normal skill to learn at school or university. What advice do you give to young founders on how to first prepare, actually, and then how to execute a board meeting? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
So I had a board meeting recently, first-time founders, where the founders told me they watched the Silicon Valley HBO show to prepare for the board meeting.
You're like, no, don't do that.
Yes. So I have a guide on this, and it's public that I share with founders. You have to basically distill down what has happened and talk about some highlights, lowlights, be able to, before the board meeting, talk with each board member individually, figure out what is it that they want to talk about, and ask them for even like 3 things. Ask them to do some homework, be prepared, come to the board meeting ready to have a discussion and add value. If you're not doing any of these things and you just show up, it might be okay for a first board meeting where people are still getting to know each other and it's anyway a very early stage company. But ideally, you have to prepare. Board meetings can be very valuable if you do the work up front.
I totally agree with you on the call beforehand. I just haven't had anyone do it. So I completely agree with you there. The other thing I would say is actually, I really like it when they send not slide decks because they can just be used as like crutches, but like a doc. And then I say send it in a Word doc, not a Google doc. Because if you send it in a Word doc, you write in isolation. Because if, you're much more engineering centric than me, if you make a comment, I'm not going to argue with you, Oana, because you're much smarter than me, especially when it comes to technical. But that's a shame. I should comment, and so a doc is better than a Google Doc because it brings out the truth more, I find. So totally agree there. In terms of the execution, we're in the board meeting. How do you advise young founders in terms of running the best board meeting in actual play?
First of all is focus and getting to the heart of the issue. If there is anything that people can be informed beforehand, we don't need to reiterate it in the meeting. Let's talk about the meaty topics. And also reading the room, and sometimes you might have an investor which acts like the mob and tries to monopolize the entire discussion, and you have to stop that as a founder. You control the board meeting, and it's on you to give everybody room.
What's the right way to stop that? I'm sure we've both seen it. I've seen it often. It's middle-aged white guys, and I feel for obviously I'm a young white guy, so it's very different. Very different. I'm much better, but it's hard for founders, especially the younger founders, to say, "Hey, seasoned multi-millionaire 50-year-old with many track records, please be quiet." What's the right way to manage that board?
Yes, if a founder doesn't feel comfortable, I had the situations where the founder has previous to the meeting asked me if I can interfere by basically asking a question or let's table that for later. You can have an ally in the boardroom. And if you do not have that, simply focusing, getting back to the main point, and maybe this is a great point, let's discuss it afterwards. I have so many more other questions.
Totally agree. Do you think the board should, and I love that in terms of the ally, by the way, do you think the board should have, I've had VCs on the show before and they say the board should meet afterwards without the founder and like review. Do you think that should happen, or is that not a necessary action? And what do you think are the necessary actions post-board meeting that you like to do?
I have boards where the board members definitely like to meet afterwards. I think getting alignment and knowing where everybody is in terms of maybe their worries or things they can do for the founder, but then always debriefing with the founder. I always debrief with the founder and give positive as well as constructive feedback and offer help for some of those topics. So I do think it's helpful, especially if you want to have everybody aligned and maybe you're an earlier stage company rather than a later stage company. And for later stage companies, it's also important to set up the expectations in terms of the quarter, debrief on the different functional leaders you've seen, all of that stuff.
Totally agree. Can I ask, in terms of like founder transparency with team, again, I think it's tough when they're very young and say the board meeting isn't very good. A lot of board meetings today are more challenging, especially in these markets. Are they transparent with their team about how the board meeting went? Often the team knows it was a board meeting. How transparent should they be around the board and their communications with that?
I think it comes down to values, and one of my core values is speak truth. You can be transparent and speak truth in a way that doesn't offend people. And the idea of that is to establish a relationship where it's safe to share when things are not going so well, and not be super shocked and disrupted that, oh my God, this thing happened. It's okay, and what actions can we take such that the next time we'll learn from it?